Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here, invited by this new venture of concerned with art and education. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to share some thoughts with you. I come very much from a visual art background and practice as an artist, and have been living in a village a little outside Bangalore, where my wife and I have settled for quite a number of years now. 1972 we went there, and she started a school for the local village children in 1975. And one of the questions which she was concerned with when she started the school was how could children who came from a background where the family also weren't literate, and the children were not at all used to books and that kind of education, where could they begin? And an idea which came to both of us was the importance of patterns. As you know, in front of houses, you get patterns, kolam or rangoli or alpana, as it's called in different parts of India. And these patterns are done by people who are often illiterate. Women who do them effortlessly. And also, we found that straight away, children would respond to patterns. We began by using just flowers arranged, as you know, in a sort of rangoli pattern, using petals of flowers, getting the children to start painting pictures based on these patterns which they had done. These would be images which they got from the garden. And then out of that, very naturally, came this ability to make patterns which were almost, you could say, you could use them on saris, or it comes very naturally to Indian children to make patterns, some more complicated. And this led, in fact, to the idea that patterns could be the basis for reading also, letters of the alphabet, Kannada, English, other alphabets. They begin as patterns, and so a lot of work has been done moving from these patterns into writing. But also there was this idea that the patterns would relate to things which they could see around them in the garden, in the countryside, and also to a kind of a world of dreams or fantasies or storytelling. Patterns have that direction that they also link up with nature on one side, what we experience outside in the world around us, but also something inside us, inner world, which is also linked with patterns. I have personally been very interested in the relationship of patterns to dreams, to what in India is known as mandalas. This is a very old pattern which goes back even to Buddhist art. In caves, we find these three hares running. It's related also in a way to a Jataka story. But it's found that these patterns are all over the world. You can, as it were, the pattern itself has a journey, a story, like on the Silk Route. It goes right across, and some patterns of this type can be found in churches. And it is what a psychologist in the West called Carl Jung called archetypical. It is something which is present with everybody. It's part of the structure, you could say, of the human mind. Here, it is a little bit mathematical in the sense it's like a kind of a trick that each rabbit has 2 ears, and yet there are only 3 ears represented, and you see them running round. This kind of playfulness and patterns, which also links with mathematics, is to be found in these interlinking triangles or circles. You could also say that each circle or triangle actually is different, is separated from every other. It's if you look at, say, the blue circle or the green circle, it's not, in fact, linked with any other circle. And yet, they are all 3 of them linked together. It's a mathematical problem, but it is one which goes back. We find this form in temples, this particular design, which I have given on the left-hand side, is from a 12th century temple. So these complex patterns, most people, I spent quite a lot of time thinking about kolam patterns, or rangoli as they're also known, and trying to myself sketch them. Well, I am skilled in drawing, but I found them quite difficult to copy. And yet, I think generally people would not think that they are important. They're done by people who are just simple villagers, or people who don't know much, or women, and they're done on the doorstep. Nobody really takes much notice of them. In fact, as I went round in the village trying to draw these patterns, people were surprised. What are you doing? Why are you copying it? And if I asked, why do you make these patterns? What do you think is the meaning of these patterns? The tendency would be to say, well, they're just pretty. We like to do them. And people perhaps wouldn't know the meaning of them. In fact, a group of us were interested in understanding these patterns and advertised in the Deccan Herald, does anybody know the meaning of these patterns? And we got a professor from Bangalore University who said she knew some of the meanings behind it. But there, one goes into a completely different world where, which perhaps the villager does not know about. Again, a person like Carl Jung would say that that doesn't matter. The fact that they don't know the meaning, cannot explain it, does not mean that they are not meaningful. So these patterns, which also relate to woven patterns, we have them here, I noticed in the carpet even, which we are treading on. They go back to early ideas about weaving and about thread, how knotting thread and so on. So they are part of what one might call a visual literacy. In fact, there was a study done by a group at the Madras Christian College who noticed that the women who would draw these patterns were quite often illiterate, but yet they could remember how to draw these patterns effortlessly. So what was the difference between drawing a pattern like that and being able to write one's name, for example? one of the differences is that these patterns are done physically with the flowing of powder through the fingers. It is remembered not just intellectually, but almost through the body. It is done right from early age as a kind of movement, a gesture. It is part of gesture. And so it belongs to a different area of the brain, which is much more related to feeling. Well, there are complex patterns, geometric patterns like these, which are much more difficult to draw, and you need a lot of understanding of mathematics to do it. But there again, we have found that by giving these patterns to people, children, to color them in, or to actually, even this process in Rangoli of putting sand, different colored powders, links the pattern back to the body, links how it is done, and the contrast of textures and the contrast of colors is one way in which they are useful. Learning how to construct these patterns brings out a whole area of symmetry. Now, this symmetry, the idea of symmetry, is not only something on a piece of paper. It is also to do with a symmetry in the body. The fact that left side and right side has a certain symmetry. We have an eye on one side, an eye on the other. And yet, part of the whole learning about the body is to learn how the body has symmetry, but also does not have symmetry. The left eye is not the same as the right eye. So this would be another area of thinking about symmetry and asymmetry. One interesting aspect about patterns is that though they're universal, and we find certain patterns which will be in all cultures all over the world, yet they have also something to do with specific cultures. I mean, looking at, say, these patterns, we could say that one pattern is very much to be found in South India, and the other pattern is a Mughal pattern. So you find that patterns, in addition to being universal, are the basis of specific cultures. And so you could introduce the whole idea of history in relationship to patterns, cultures in relation to patterns. Like Corbusier said that the greatest contribution to architecture of India was the Jali pattern. You are familiar with these patterns, which help to diffuse the light, but which are also used so that people inside can look outside but cannot be seen inside. They are part of Islamic tradition, but have been a great influence on Indian architecture. So that you find, for example, in these patterns here, that the pattern on the left is typically Mughal, but the pattern on the right is in a Hindu temple. And so there again, you find that patterns cross over divides of religion. You can say, this pattern has a Hindu or a Jain or a Buddhist quality to it, but yet it is something which people of all religions can appreciate and can share. I myself am very interested in the possibility of art as forming a way of interreligious dialogue. And also patterns are of different crafts. You find one side is inlay work, on the other side is a kind of pattern which could be in fabric. But there again, the pattern making crosses over all the different crafts. So it is a unifying element amongst different crafts. And so here we have a tremendous variety of patterns in India, coming from all kinds of cultures, which were in fact formed the basis of much of craft work. Strangely, in the West, there was a distinction made between the fine arts and the decorative arts. I remember when I went to art school, there was always a feeling that these kind of patterns were decorative in a pejorative sense. But the question is, now I think increasingly, and as a result of the arts and crafts movement, the decorative arts are not to be looked down on as something lower than the fine arts. So the link now, which is increasingly made, is between patterns and the way in which we understand nature, and leading from nature into abstraction, so that one approach to patterns is to get young people or anybody to see these patterns also in the whole way in which crystals or in which plants, it is fundamental to the whole of nature. And that brings us to this very interesting area of the conceptual linked across to what was thought to be just decorative. Conceptual ideas about patterns which perhaps underlie the way in which we think of grids, or in the way in which a computer works, in a way in which electricity functions. And on the other hand, these kind of so-called pretty patterns which people draw on the... So now we are talking about in computers the World Wide Web, and so patterns are really concerned with connections, with how we make in our minds certain links. And it is that element of pattern making which on the one hand is very physical, very much part of the world of decoration, and on the other hand is mathematical, concerned with science, concerned with the way in which we understand order and chaos. This is the wide span of our interest in patterns. And so when I asked what do people know about the background of even these kolam patterns or rangoli, which people do in front of their doorstep, and this professor on the university said, you see, it all comes actually from Tantra. Now, those you will know about Tantra. Tantra is one of the 6 darshanas, the 6 ways of thought, systems of thinking in India. It is a whole philosophical system going back to Sankhya, which was also collected with yoga. And so these patterns are also used right from ancient times as the basis for meditation. In fact, that is the reason why they were particularly interesting to psychologists. And it connects folk art, the art which we have in tribal cultures, where also these patterns are there, and storytelling, and the very modern world of how we think and how our minds work. All this is interrelated.